and welcome to the Disabled Movie Club, a video series where we go into agonizing detail of the disabled representation in the media. Today's episode, we are diving into an episode of the Dream Motel, specifically the episode My Brother's Keeper. If you are brand new to our channel, this is our weekly video where we go into these details of what disabled representation in movies and TV show look like coming from two disabled girlies. I have an invisible disability, I have POTS, and I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user.
I've had a physical disability my whole life. I have muscular dystrophy, and I've used some sort of mobility aid essentially my whole life. Growing up, I used a walker, and then once I got into middle school, I started using a wheelchair full-time.
The Dream Motel is a very low-budget TV show that we found on Amazon Prime.
It's a Christian TV show, and it's very typical of Christian media.
It is basically Christian Twilight Zone, but really low budget.
So you can watch it on Amazon Prime. It is included with your Prime subscription. You can also watch it for free on PureFlix. It's like Great American PureFlix or something. It's the Christian version of Netflix.
The official synopsis of The Dream Motel is: guests at the Dream Motel find themselves face to face with their past, their future, and their present. All things are possible for the guests of the Dream Motel. We did not watch the whole series. We were specifically talking about one episode. The episodes do not intertwine or interlock. It's not an ongoing storyline. Like the Twilight Zone, it's completely individual storylines per episode. The episode we did is Brother's Keeper. We will be calling it My Brother's Keeper probably this whole video because I cannot get the word my out of my head because it's just like My Sister's Keeper. But that was actually good. The synopsis of the episode is: for most of her adult life, Toni James has been responsible for her kid brother, Freddie. He's 20, just so we know. Her kid brother, Freddie, who was born mentally challenged.
We're using the actual words they use, just so you know.
On a business trip to the Dream Motel, Jessie shows Toni what her life would be like without Freddie. The idea of the show is that these people show up to the Dream Motel and then they are taught religious values, basically. It's the gist. This one has to do with disabled people, so we watched it. We generally don't give you a super in-depth of what happens during the show and movie because so far we've addressed some pretty popular, easy to access movies and TV shows. But we are going to go into more details for this one just because it is such a niche piece of media. I would be surprised how many people have actually seen this. More of the plot: Toni takes care of her brother. Her brother has some sort of mental disability and he was born with it. I would describe it similar to how autism is represented in the media. It kind of followed those similar traits and stereotypes of it, which wasn't great. Toni's basically fed up with taking care of her brother, and so she goes to this motel and she's like, I wish he wasn't my brother. And then she is shown what her life would be like if he wasn't her brother, in which it is miserable.
She can't keep a job, she's an alcoholic, she's
poor.
They
emphasize
poor.
that one a lot.
Yeah. She's very poor, she has no money, she's single, she's dated this cop, which
I
is
don't
like
know why that's bad.
Yeah, it was like a big point. It was a big point that she like dated this cop, and she was like, I would never date him.
Yeah, it was so weird.
And then she calls up Jessie, who is supposed to be Jesus, at the Dream Motel, and is like, Jessie, I want to go back to my old life. And he's like, you can't.
Yeah, he says that, but then
immediately takes her back to her old life, and then she goes back and sees Freddie and is like, I'm so sorry, I've just been really busy, but
for 10 years. She literally says, like, I've been busy for 10 years.
She's like, I just haven't been able to commit the time to you. I've just been like,
she has a husband and a child also, all after she started taking care of Freddie.
It sounds like a bad breakup, honestly. But then they read together and, like, I guess ableism was solved.
Yeah, she, like, learned that without Freddie, none of these things would have happened. Like, all these coincidences of her being somewhere wouldn't have happened. So, therefore, her life was more terrible without her disabled brother. One thing I noticed is that this storyline really focuses on the sister and not the actual disabled person, which is very common in movies with disabled characters. They're not ever the stars, they're always a plot point or a guilt trip to move things forward for a character.
Yeah, they're always just there as a emotional burden to other people, and physical burden too, and financial burden. You know, all burdens, I guess.
We are just burdens.
Yeah.
Yay.
But they don't have a plot of their own, they don't have a mind of their own. And that really shows in this. So the first point that I brought up was that Tony acts like Freddie is a lot more... okay, I'm trying to figure out how to word that.
He needs more assistance than he really requires.
Like, he's honestly just up in his room, like, vibing.
Another thing is, like, Freddie has, like, personality and a life and is, like, somebody you can interact with and have a conversation with. And while all disabled people, of course, have value no matter where your limitations are, the sister acts like he just sits there all day and she doesn't get anything out of this relationship. She doesn't get anything about having a brother. Like, he's just a drain, but, like, seemed like a cool guy to hang out with.
Yeah.
Like, you could have conversations and talk and, like...
Yeah, like, one of the scenes, it's at the end after she realizes that he, like, has value in life. She walks into his room and he's just, like, sitting underneath his blanket, like, reading a book. And, like, you're supposed to see that and be like, oh, wow, he must really be disabled. He's so quirky. But, like...
That's what I do. I just sit and read my book under my blanket.
Yeah, like, me too. Like, can we just sit and read our books under our blankets together?
No. She's also a writer, by the way. She stays at home and she writes.
She's a screenwriter.
She
writes
screenwriter.
movies. That's why...
This is the first one to ever be picked up. And she's been writing for 10 years. So let's also talk about that.
That's why she's going to the Dream Motel, because it's going to be the perfect place for her movie.
The big part that Tony is really going through is because she's so fed up with taking care of her brother, if he should be placed in an assisted living home, or she'll continue to take care of him. There is never an in-between option of, like, maybe a caretaker comes in a few times a week, or he goes to someone's house during the day. There's never an in-between. It's either I will never see him again and he'll be in assisted living, which also isn't really how assistive living facilities work, by the way.
It seems like she wants to, like, give him up for adoption.
That's how she's treating it, and it's like, that's, at least as far as I know, not how that works.
No.
And I did appreciate that in this, Tony was saying, like, well, they do a lot of fun events, and he'll be around people like him, which are all, like, again, assistive living, I don't think is, like, should be a negative thing, or be like, oh my god, they need extra care, that this is so bad. That is how Jesse, who, like, owns the hotel and plays this Jesus-like character, acts. It is unbelievable to have somebody in assisted living when you can take care of them. Like, how dare you put them in that situation? Yeah. Which, it just depends on the situation, where you are at life. Like, that's an insane thing to assume about someone.
But also, Freddie doesn't need that level of care.
No.
From what we've seen. You know, once again...
He's in it for, like, a total of 5 minutes. It's like a 40-minute show.
Like, she just makes him stay in his room and doesn't give him things to do.
Like, she's a terrible caregiver and sister.
Yeah.
A terrible person.
Well, even her husband, like, kind of, not fights her, but pushes back when they're on the phone, because she's like, no, like, he definitely needs to go to assisted living. And he's like, are you sure?
Does he? He kind of seems fine, happy.
Yeah. Like, she basically says, she's like, sometimes I just wish he wasn't my brother. And the husband was like, you don't mean that. And she was like, no, I really mean it.
I think it's valid to feel those feelings and to feel how exhausting caregiving is. Mm-hmm. It's exhausting. You're taking care of yourself and someone else 24/7. But that's why there's resources and additional help and certainly things she could have done to relieve some stress on the situation. But when we're having this conversation in this episode, it's literally 10 years since she's been taking care of him. Like, to have these feelings at 31, to be like, oh, I'm just so over it. Like, grow up.
Yeah.
Like, be a mature person and be like, okay, I can deal with this because I'm 31. Like, we're not talking about, like, oh, it's two teenagers and they're similar in age and this is really frustrating. Like, it's not like that at all.
Then she moves away from the house. She goes to the Dream Motel and meets Jesse, aka Jesus.
Tony's having a drink at the bar when a somewhat stranger of the hotel owner, Jesse, aka Jesus, comes in and sits down and starts prying into her life.
So I thought it was really funny because Jessie sits down and is like, so what's going on in your life? And then she's like, oh, well, I have to go to Silver Springs. I think that's what the care facility is called. And he's like, well, who are you admitting there? And why are you admitting them? And then she's like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that. And he was like, oh, well, it's your brother that you don't want to have anymore. And
I understand this character is Jesus and it's supposed to be like all-knowing, but like it's also so realistic to have strangers pry about your medical information. And I thought that was really funny. I don't think this show intended to do that because that's how disabled people / people around disabled people feel.
But it's so accurate.
But it is really accurate.
A quote that I wrote that I thought was really interesting. So after they meet Jessie, and Jessie's like, yeah, so actually I'm gonna solve all of your problems and Freddie will be no more. And what he says in quotes is, Freddie will be no more and will no longer be your burden.
I was like, like,
and she tries to backpedal and she's like, he's not a burden. And Jessie's like, is he though?
Isn't he?
But isn't he though?
Disabled people are always the burden, and yes, care for a disabled person does require more effort. I wouldn't say burden.
I also think it's interesting that we never compare caregiving of a disabled person to caregiving of a child. Because you would never tell a mother, oh, well, that child's just a burden on you. You know, it's such a beautiful thing, and you can't complain about having a child, which I think you can validate those feelings that it is hard to care for another human being.
Yeah, it's hard to care for yourself.
It's hard to care for a child. It's hard to care for an adult that needs more assistance. Like, that is a hard feeling to have. And it's okay to validate that feeling. But why is it only with disabled people that they become a burden? The thing that kind of sets us all off is Freddie breaks a vase. Because he was playing ball inside the house.
Don't even get me started on this stupid vase.
And basically, Tony's really upset because it was her grandmother's vase.
The last thing I have from my grandmother is this vase. Then why is it out on basically his desk?
Yeah, why is it in his room?
It's in his room on his dresser.
Yeah. So,
what did you think was gonna happen?
and also, like,
Pisses me off.
mistakes happen.
Sure.
I'm 20 and I knock things over all the time.
My cats knock things over, but you know what? I don't leave things of value within their reach and then get mad at them for knocking it over.
Yeah, like, you break things,
Like, if
it
you cared
happens.
so much about this vase, put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
She was so hung up on this vase. Like, you know how important it was for me. And then he breaks the vase, and she's like, I told you no ball in the house, no supper for you. Like,
yeah!
dude, you're abusing him. Like, what?
Like, one moment you're saying that he doesn't know better, and then the next moment you're holding him
Yes.
to this standard that he can't meet. Like, choose a lane.
Choose a lane. That's a really, really good point. That's exactly, this whole TV show, this whole episode of her was like, he doesn't know better, but I want him to. Jessie takes away Tony's current life, and Tony is left. I wrote down the things that they really emphasize. Poor, criminal, lonely, alcoholic, jobless.
Something that I think is really interesting is that people assume that the presence of a disabled person is going to fix all of your problems and cause inspiration. And I think they make that point in an interesting way that I don't think they're meaning to make, was that in the world where Freddie doesn't exist, Tony essentially has some sort of mental illness going on. We don't really know what it is, but there's definitely some impulsivity, some addiction, possibly manic behavior, something going on that she doesn't have in this life with Freddie. And they imply, well, they don't imply, they explicitly state that
They do.
all of her problems are caused by her not having Freddie. And because she had Freddie, she had to essentially get her life together. And obviously in real life, disabled people don't solve your problems.
Also, like, mental illness isn't a choice, and or something that is like,
That you can just suck at.
Yeah, and they definitely act like, well, because you're poor and miserable and jobless, like, you have the mental illness now. It's like, well, if she had mental illness, she would have it in both universes.
Yes.
And, like, the thing that they really, like, drove home, like you said, like, oh, you had to get your life in order, is that, like, disabled people force you to be responsible.
Yeah.
Which, if this was just taking care of her brother, like, he wasn't disabled, and it was like, oh my gosh, I had to get my life together because my brother needs me. Okay, I agree. You know, there are certain events in your life that cause you to be more responsible. But to be like, no, you partied every night for all these years, you're an alcoholic who went to jail. It's like, whoa, hey, maybe she would have been responsible without Freddie too. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Side note, if you thought that this show was created in the early 2000s or the early 90s, you would be wrong.
I was shocked.
You would be wrong. It was made in 2019, and it is still running.
After she realizes how completely miserable her life is in all extremes, she's like, give me my life back.
And he's like, no.
Yeah, he's like, no. And he's like, well, how did you meet your husband? And she's like, well, Freddie wanted to go to the fair. And that's where I met my husband. And there was like a couple of things. Well, why'd you start writing? Well, because of Freddie. Like, it was like basically just coincidences that they are connecting all to Freddie. And so therefore, Freddie needs to be in her life. So after Toni connects all these coincidences, she gets her old life back, and all of a sudden she is nice to Freddie. Crazy. I know, there was a moral at the end of this.
Disabled people do deserve rights.
And then she goes into Freddie's room and she's like, I'm sorry, you know, like we talked about earlier, like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a terrible sister
for 10 years.
Yeah, sorry, I've been busy. I'm a little preoccupied, like not responding to a text. That's how she acted in this situation. And she's like, oh, this book, I love it. Do you want me to read it to you? She's like, and he's like, I've been waiting for you to read that to me. You promised me 5 years ago. And it's like, and she's like, oh damn, I forgot. Like,
and he's like, well, I did it.
Yeah. He also gives some very religious quote of, well, my pastor said, and then like did this big quote. So he quotes his pastor's unforgiving quote. It really doesn't matter what it is. The point was, of course, the disabled person has to give this inspirational little thing so that they can be worthy and really show inspiration to other people, which is stupid.
Also a quote that Toni makes, and I don't think she makes it to Freddie. It's definitely not to Freddie. I don't know if she just says it to herself. I don't remember. But she says, I haven't stopped to look at all the beauty and love that I have in my life because of Freddie. And like, yes, I agree. He does provide value, obviously.
He's a human being.
But maybe you wouldn't feel that way. And Jesse actually kind of makes that a point. Where he's like, well, do you actually just feel this way about your brother because your life sucks without him? Like, would you feel this way?
And she's like, no.
But like, she doesn't know.
Because why would you? You don't know the life you don't have.
Once again, we have to go in a total hyperbole situation. She can't say that, absolutely no, it's really him that I care about when her life sucks in this hypothetical world where he's gone.
The biggest feeling that I felt after watching this was used. Toni uses Freddie to go back to this old life to get what she wants. She wants her career back, she wants her husband and her family back, and her money, because they really emphasize that so much. And I just felt used. Like, I just felt gross. And it was just a yucky feeling to feel after watching a 40-minute TV show, to be like, oh, I'm disabled and I'm only there to be used by other people.
Yeah. I felt like it was really... I had seen it before, but it feels very, very reminiscent of my time growing up in a religious community. And that's not what this TV show is about, but you know, I feel like that is something that a lot of disabled people feel in religious communities. You know, you're meant to be there as the inspiration and the miracle, and you're meant to be there as proof that God exists. and that's really frustrating. Something that's really frustrating in the show is that as the viewer, if you're not like us and trying to seek out every single piece of disability representation in the media, you assume that the video that you're watching is disabled representation in the media. And I think that is
Facts.
really unfortunate when it comes to Tony as a caregiver. Because Tony sucks as a person. Like, she's just a bad person, honestly. Yeah. You know, once again, I think that those feelings of being a caregiver are so valid, but she really just sucks as a person. And honestly, every other character in this show kind of tells her that. Like, I hate that she's the main character in the show, because I think that if Shane, her husband, was the main character, I think it would be a more realistic depiction of what a typical caregiver feels. Because obviously, I'm sure he feels some sort of way about having this extra person in your house that you do have to care for. And, you know, he married in, so that's a choice that he made. But he at least isn't like, I hope he was dead. And I hate that it's this narrative of, like, you have to teach people to have morals when you're 31. Like, you should not have to teach someone at 31 years old that you should care for other people. And if you do, that's sad. Grow up.
It really is. One last thing before we get to the ratings so we can wrap this up. Something I will talk about in every single video we do. I do not like when an able-bodied person plays a disabled character. Those roles should be given to disabled people. And from what we could tell, the person who played Freddie does not have a disability. There wasn't like a whole ton of information just because the show is such a niche little subject. He played a very stereotypical version of autism, which again is gross. Like the way he stood and kind of hunched over and the words that he strung and like where he would look, it was not good. It was gross to watch, to be like, wow, you're trying to be disabled instead of just hiring somebody with a disability. And this was truly the first time of the series that we've done that the person wasn't disabled playing the character. So Tori, how many hotels would you give this? Our scale of 5 out of 5, 5 being the best disability rep you've ever seen in your life, 1 being boo.
I'm giving it a 3.5, but I have an explanation. No, I don't think the actual disability representation is good. However, I think that the reaction to a disabled person is very accurate to society. So the actual disability representation is not good. I would give that like a 0.5. That's where the 0.5 comes from. The 3 is from the rest of it, because I do think it is, sadly, very accurate.
I'm going to give it 2 hotels out of 5. I thought it was overall terrible. I thought the disability representation was terrible. I thought how other people's treated disabled characters were terrible. And honestly, I would give it a 1 if it wasn't for Jesse being so prying into someone's medical information. Because that is so realistic, it's scary. That means our average was 2.75 for this movie out of 5
hotels.
We have seen better, and so far we haven't seen worse. So we will just keep on
going
and see what happens.
Just wait until next week.
If you enjoyed this video, if you could please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We are going through so many movies at the Disabled Movie Club, talking about disability and how we feel about it.
And comment below where your favorite place to travel as a disabled person is.
Thank you so much for joining us for this video. Again, my name is Kendall. That's Tori. Those are my cats. That's Peanut. I don't know where Cashew is. I think he's sitting with her. We will see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, police. I would like to report an incident.